Good morning, buenos dias. My name is Marie Gaarder and I'm the Executive Director of 3IE, the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. It is a great honor to be invited by Dr. Ricardo Cordova, Executive Director of Fundaungo, to speak to you virtually at this important conference dedicated to evidence in public policy. This is a topic very close to my heart and to the mission of 3IE. So, señoras y señores, es un placer poder estar con ustedes virtualmente esta mañana. Why is evidence important in public policies? Every year, billions of dollars are spent on ineffective public policies and programs around the world. Every year, billions more are spent on programs that could have been made more effective. Every year, further billions are spent on programs that have large unintended adverse consequences. And finally, every year, another further billions of dollars or pesos are spent on programs whose effectiveness we have no evidence on, though we may be very convinced of their effectiveness. Now, what is my point here? It all adds up. And it is a moral and ethical imperative to try to make policies effective. Why do I say moral and ethical? Well, lives could have been improved or saved if we had had informed policies with evidence. So what do we mean by evidence in the context of public policies? Well, evidence-informed policymaking means using the best available research evidence systematically and transparently in the time available. Best available research evidence, what is that? Well, it is the one that is the highest quality, most locally applicable, synthesized to the highest extent, and that helps answer the evidence questions. What can it help inform in terms of public policy making? Well, it can inform first the agenda setting, or what we call selecting the problems and their focus and their causes to focus on. Now, how can research evidence help to clarify a problem, you might ask? Well, first of all, it can help identify what is the problem and its causes. Research evidence can help look at what comparisons can be made to establish the magnitude of the problem and to measure progress in addressing it. It can also help look at how a problem can be framed or described in a way that will motivate different groups. So this is in relation to the problem identification. Now, furthermore, research evidence can be used to look at policy development or how we frame the options available. Now, how can research evidence help frame options? It can help us look at what an appropriate set of options are to address the problem. It can help us answer what benefits are important to those who will be affected and which benefits are likely to be achieved with each option. It can also help look at what harms are important to those who will be affected and which harms are likely to arise with each option. And importantly, what are the local costs of each option, and is there local evidence about their cost effectiveness? It can look at what adaptations might be made to any given option, and might these adaptations alter the benefits, harms, and costs. It can also help look at which stakeholders' views and experiences might influence the acceptability of an option and its benefits, harms, and costs. Now we've talked about the framing, we talked about the problems, we talked about the framing. Now, finally and importantly, it can also help us look at policy implementation, and particularly help identify barriers and facilitators and how these can be addressed. So how can data and research evidence help to identify implementation considerations? Well, it can help look at where the potential barriers and facilitators are for successful implementation of an option. Are they at the level of citizens, service providers, organizations, or systems? It can help us look at what strategies should be considered in order to facilitate the necessary behavioral changes, organizational changes, or systems changes. One interesting issue that needs to be considered at the level of public policy systems is that different policies can be internally inconsistent and their objectives work at cross purposes. And research evidence can help us identify these internal inconsistencies, and propose solutions. Now I have talked about all the good things we can achieve by using data and research evidence to inform public policy. So why isn't more of it taking place? Well, it comes surely as no big surprise when I tell you that policy decisions are complex. We are not in a world of where one person, call it a benevolent dictator, who has everybody's best interest in mind and can take a unitary and unilateral decision. Rather, many factors besides evidence affects decisions. Often ideological priors can drive decisions, or just the need to be doing something and be seen as doing something. Also, changing priorities or positions based on evidence and new evidence typically are not the types of behaviors that are rewarded in policy debates. Now, even if evidence is desired, there are multiple stakeholders with diverse incentives. In fact, it is often said that status quo is not the default. Things are like they are today because of the mix of incentives and priorities of current players. A further consideration is that evidence can be distorted. Evidence can easily be distorted by all parties to support one's agendas and support one's priors, rather than to be objectively taken into account in decision making. An additional factor to consider is that there are different incentives of evidence producers or researchers and users, policymakers. And researchers, they tend to want the highest quality, partly because of their incentives. They would like to get published and recognized academically. On the other hand, you have users and policymakers who would like clear guidance, clear takeaways, and they want it yesterday. So what can institutions and what can countries do to build research evidence into public policy? Well, at country level, we've seen some very promising examples. Countries like Mexico, Chile, and Colombia, for example, have built the requirement of having research evidence to back programs and policies proposed in the budget. They made that a requirement. And this is a very promising approach. Now, moving to institutions, like how is 3IE addressing these challenges of improving uptake and use of evidence? If you see this figure here, you see that what 3IE is dedicated to is to support the generation of high quality and relevant studies. And this leads to, and we do it in a way where researchers engage with stakeholders throughout the study cycle. And this together is going to lead to study findings and recommendations being used. This is sort of the very simple linear model, but underlying it, of course, are a range of assumptions. First of all, the high quality studies that we produce need to answer relevant and useful questions. They need to have multidisciplinary research teams that are highly engaged. Underlying the researchers' engagement, we in fact require of all our researchers and ourselves to have a plan, an engagement plan and a budget for engagement and communication, respond to the evidence needs of the users. In fact, we call our engagement plan the Stakeholder Engagement and Evidence Uptake Plan, SEEP, and it includes a number of factors that help inform the best way the research can inform policy. It looks at the context, it does risk analysis, it looks at evidence uptake and use objectives, stakeholder analysis, and key influencers. It also includes an engagement and communication plan and a monitoring and learning component. And then underlying the idea that study findings and recommendations are used are a number of assumptions. For example, that the findings and recommendations are, of course, evidence-based, that they also are made context-specific, and that they are feasible and, importantly, cost-effective, which requires, of course, that all 3IE-supported research looks at cost-effectiveness. In this graph, we show you how 3IE products and support is provided at various stages evidence use cycle. To the left, we need to identify evidence needs and evaluation questions. And for that purpose, 3IE has developed an evidence portal biggest evidence portal of its kind, which includes about 4,000 impact evaluations, over 700 systematic reviews, and over 20 evidence gap maps. And this is then where we ourselves, but also others who are interested in finding out what do we already know, what does the current evidence tell us, can go into this portal and find out where is the evidence, what does it say, and where are the gaps. 3IE also has been supporting quality assuring and producing evidence in a number of evidence programs, some of these dedicated to specific themes like transparency, immunization, agricultural insurance. And then we also have country programs, for example, working with the authorities in the Philippines and Uganda and a number of the West African countries like Benin and Togo. And we have produced over 250 primary studies supporting and informing policy across the world. Now, finally, in terms of evidence use, we are dedicated to synthesizing existing evidence in terms of systematic reviews and evidence gap maps. We also are pilot testing what we call help desk services, where we extract and interpret the existing research and evidence so that it is understandable and context relevant to specific policy questions in a very timely and rapid fashion. We produce policy briefs, blogs. We produce recommendations for policymakers. We engage with potential users and also have partnerships with evidence brokers in various countries. And all of this, of course, is with the goal to improve lives through evidence-informed action in developing countries. Throughout the cycle, we provide capacity strengthening, demand generation workshops, and we give access to services and tools to help production and use. Now you might ask, okay, so you're using evidence all through the cycle, but how do you know whether your evidence is actually used? And do you have evidence to show that? So what does 3IE monitor? We are measuring evidence use after the completion of research and doing it rigorously through theory-based methods such as contribution tracing. Contribution tracing is based on the principles of process tracing and Bayesian probability. It helps correct bias and provides a confidence rating for our claims of impact. This is one of the main distinguishing factors of 3IE as an institution. And in this next slide, I'll show you what we have found using contribution tracing methods. In 3IE, we measure and monitor instances of uptake and use of 3IE-funded impact evaluations, systematic reviews, and evidence gap maps. This figure shows that we have recorded 172 instances until September 2020. We monitor 7 indicators as shown in the illustration on your screen. The most frequently recorded use instances are of informing discussions of policies and programs. This is followed by informing the design of other programs, and then other indicators like instances of changing policies and programs and of improving the culture of evidence. Let me finally talk to you about a case of applying contribution tracing to our work. This was an evaluation of a community-driven reconstruction program in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. The impact evaluation findings found no impact of the program on economic well-being and on socio-political attitudes and behaviors of populations. The findings led the IRC, International Rescue Committee, to consider designing a research program to investigate CDR programming to apply lessons to future programs and evaluation designs. Now, importantly, this change was reported to us in 2013. However, we did not have a clear picture of what happened since then and whether this was followed up on. In 2018, as part of a closed grant review project, we used contribution tracing to come up with a list of proofs we needed to understand and validate the evidence use claim. 3IE staff recently interviewed IRC staff to understand how the evidence was used and ask specific questions on the value of the 3IE supported study. And the study informed First of all, a feasibility study in Somalia to inform CDE programs in that context. And it also informed the design of the next phases of the program. Now, IRC is an invested partner and believes in evidence-informed programming, and we were able to go back and trace the story and in a verifiable way. In 3IE's experience, we have found that there are a myriad of factors apart from evidence that determine how decisions get made. However, there is no doubt that evidence can and does contribute, and that countries and organizations can do more to incentivize and promote the use of rigorous evidence to improve public policies and thereby improve and save lives. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best for the rest of this conference, which is dedicated to the very important topic of research evidence and its use in public policy. And I hope we will all join hands in making sure that this happens more and more and in a more consistent and institutionalized way. Thank you very much. Gracias.